Okay, so in a previous video, I've created a set of traits, our request, and we've written two tests. Now, in our image upload request, we have temporarily typed in images for the directory. And I said we're going to update this. And this is the time we're actually going to tackle that. So under the assets, we are going to create a new directory, and we're going to name it type. And under the type directory, we're going to list all of the asset types that we want to allow. So for instance, we're going to have one for image, which is going to be used in this case. And then we are going to have one for document, for instance. And with the time, if you have any other type, you will be able to add to it. Now, all of those types will share the same interface. So what we could do here is create an interface for this, and we are going to call it type contract, for instance, or call it asset type contract, and it's going to be an interface. And what this interface will require is the public static function, which will be called directory, and it's going to return a string. And here we're just going to say get storage directory. So we can close this contract, and let's make sure that it implements it. So the document will implement asset type contract, and let's add this method stub, and let's make sure that the doc block says inherit doc. And for the document, we're going to have documents, so return documents. And then we have the same for image, implements asset type contract. Let's add this directory method, and again, same thing about the doc block. Inherit doc, and this one will be images, so return images. So now, rather than typing this here, what we can do is use this image class and as a type and use the directory method on it. So we can now close this file. We can close this one as well. And let's write the next test. This time, validation fails with non-image file type. And now if we open our upload image request, we go to image upload request, we've validated against required, so it needs to have something. It cannot be, the request cannot be without the given field, and it cannot, and this field cannot be empty. So the required now is being tested against. Now we're testing against the image, so it needs to be of the image type. So we're going to start with a storage facade. And we make sure that we're using a fake, so we're not actually interacting with the real file. So let me just rearrange these things. System, and we're going to start with the response. I'm going to copy this from the previous test, so we have this response. Now we are going to use the uploaded file. Illuminate HTTP uploaded file. We want to this to be a fake as well, and we are going to create the file called file.pdf, which obviously isn't an image, and we're going to specify that the maximum file says that the file should be 1 megabyte, so 1000 kilobytes, and that is within the minimum, the maximum size, so we shouldn't be getting any validation error because of the file size. We can obviously make it smaller if we want to, but I'm just going to keep it at the maximum that we are allowed to. Okay, so that's our file being sent, and now for the file we should, rather than the required validation rule, now we should have image. So the message should be for the image. Again, it comes from the same language file, so validation, if we look for image, and there we go, image there, attribute must be an image. That's the message that we should have, and for the attribute we are replacing this attribute placeholder with the file keyword. So now what should we expect? We should expect that after this validation, this request fails, we also don't have any asset records. We don't have asset model yet. We'll create in just a second. So assert count should be 0 when we're looking for asset and we fetching all of the records. And then this assert count should be 0 as well when we are browsing. Again, we're using the storage facade, the directory, so all files inside of the directory, which is going to be image, type and directory. So inside of this directory there shouldn't be any file because the validation failed on this upload request. Now we don't have this asset model, so let's quickly create it together with the migration. So PHP artisan make model, and we're going to call it asset, and we want migration, so -- migration. So hit return, and now this asset model has been added, and I'm just going to close all those directories. Set HTTP, okay, and under the database we have now migration asset as well. We're not going to be doing anything with this yet. At the moment we just want to check that it hasn't been added. We'll deal with this a little bit later on. Let's just rearrange these files. I like to keep them this way. I know we are now sorting them alphabetically, but I keep them that way. Anything that comes externally or from everything that comes from the vendor goes separated from what I've generated with the system, actually our own code. So obviously if I run the code now, where it is passing, excuse me, because we already have this request with this specific validation rule for the image. So that is now passing because the validation fails. Validation rule fails. So that test passes. Now one last that is going to check for the validation. We're going to check against the maximum file size. So the next test we are going to do is going to be called validation fails with maximum file size exceeded. And we're going to start same way. If I just copy all this, but rather than create, we're gonna use create because we want to specify the size, but rather than PDF, we're going to make sure that it's JPG, and it's going to be 1001 kilobytes, which is just 1 kilo above the maximum. Is that right? 1000 was there? It is 1000, yes. So that should fail. And let's just to make sure, let's specify the MIME type, which is going to be image JPEG. So we're creating this now. Rather than image, it should be max and file. Now, why do we use two keywords here? If we go back to validation max, you'll see that max has internal validation rules array, so it can be for numeric, it's a different message, for file, for string, and for array is a different message. So we want maximum for the file size. So the message will be there. The attribute, in our case, it's going to be file, may not be greater than, and maximum attribute is what we need, kilobytes. So attribute we have, but let's just use the max, which we're going to specify 1000 kilobytes. And again, we shouldn't have any assets added. We shouldn't have any file uploaded to the server, to our storage. So let's run this test, and this also passes. So in the next video, we're actually going to start working on the test that that checks whether the file has been uploaded and processed using intervention image.